Welcome back to On Thriving, Astrology, and More with me, your host, Astrologer Taylor Shuler. So I am so happy to that you're here listening to this episode today. I'm talking with Astrologer Louise Edington. I will introduce her in a minute, but we had a fabulous conversation about Venus. Louise is a Venus expert. She has a Venus enchantment community, which I'll repeat in just a moment, but we wanted to talk about the fact that Venus is going to be retrograde in the sign of Leo this year. And so we end up kind of going all over the map and tying things together because, as we know, things don't happen in a vacuum. Things happen as they happen, and things conspire for our greatest and highest good. So we talk about a number of transits for 2023, and we also talk about transits that happened in 2020, 2021, 2022, and how it all ties together and what we can expect. So Louise Edington has been studying and practicing astrology as an interest for over 30 years and working professionally as an evolutionary astrologer since 2012. Known as the Cosmic Owl of Cosmic Owl Astrology, Louise loves to combine all of her passions as an astrologer, author, shamanic practitioner, and certified hypnotherapy and past life regression therapist. Louise helps clients to regain a deep connection with the cycles of the universe so that they create an extraordinary life experience and a life that is wildly free, untethered, and both extra and non-ordinary. She provides astrological counseling, astrology classes, and a Venus enchantment membership community. You can learn more about her services at louiseedington.com and as Cosmic Owl Astrology on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Louise's 3 books, The Complete Guide to Tarot and Astrology, The Complete Guide to Astrology, and Modern Astrology, are all available at all major booksellers, including indie outlets. So stay tuned. This is a wonderful episode with me and Louise. Let us know what you think. Check out her Venus enchantment community. Check out Louise's website. If you want a reading, we say this at the end, but if you want a reading, if you're curious to learn more about your Venus, you can book a reading with me. I am accepting clients. You can book a reading with Louise. You can join her Venus enchantment community. We'd love to have you, and we'd love to know, what do you think about Venus? What are your thoughts about this Venus retrograde cycle? And what are you thinking about how it ties into the greater picture of the astrology of not just this year, but the recent past and the recent future, or even way far ahead in the future? Enjoy. Hi there. Welcome back, everyone. I am here with Astrologer Louise Edington. So excited. We're going to be talking about Venus today, which I think is really apt, especially because with numerology, at least, it's a 7-year. And so, if you add 2 + 2 + 3, you get 7. And 7, with different numerologies, there's different things that you can associate the numbers with the planets. One system will say that 7 is related to Venus, and another system says that the 7 years more related to Neptune. But either way, Neptune's the higher octave of Venus. And so I think it's really apt that we're talking about Venus, and we're with a Venus expert. So Louise, tell folks your Venus credentials and why you're excited to talk about Venus today.
Well, I've been working with Venus since clearly working with Venus before, but in 2017, I actually woke up from a dream, and Venus literally kind of came to me and said, "You're going to do a Venus retrograde class." And so I didn't know all the intricacies of the Venus cycle at that point, but I went ahead and did what Venus told me, because Venus is my most elevated planet. It's right at the top of my chart, a degree from my midheaven. So she really speaks to me. And so since then, I've done a Venus retrograde class, and then I just deepened my work with the Venus cycle. I became certified in Ariel Gutman's Venus star point work, and I have a membership community called the Venus Enchantment Community. And speaking of Venus and Neptune, my Venus and Neptune are conjunct too. So
wow, look at that. So I happened to mention the thing about Venus and Neptune, and we've got the Venus Neptune person here with us to be the expert for us. So that's very cool. So for folks who might be newer to astrology and might not know, can you help us, tell us, what is this Venus cycle? Why should we care about Venus retrograde? When does it happen? What can you do with it?
Well, the Venus cycle is forms a 5-pointed star, the pentagram, hence my pentagram on my necklace. And every 8 years, Venus returns to pretty much the same spot, retrograde. And every 19 months, the Venus and the Sun meet at a different point in the retrograde cycle. So over in all, the Venus cycle is kind of like an invisible clock working in the background. It moves backwards through the signs, whereas generally with transits, with the planetary movements, we see them moving forward through the signs. The Venus clock moves backwards, and it really is a quite magical and simple technique to use. We each have a personal prenatal Venus star point, which was when Venus and the Sun met while we were cooking in the womb. But then collectively we have a Venus star point as well. And we're actually in a really big point in time of history at the moment, because we just had a Venus star point, a direct Venus star point. Venus was moving direct on the other side of the Sun from our perspective. And Venus and the Sun met at 29 Libra for the first Libra star point since 1879. And that's echoing a star point that was actually on October the 22nd, 1771. So history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And so, we're going to get similar themes. And during the Libra star point, which is going to be around for over 100 years, we're all going to not outlive that Venus star point. It was a time of Renaissance. It was a time of huge inventions and progress, if depending on how you look at progress, I suppose. But it was also a time of revolutions. We had the American Revolution and French Revolution, and a couple of others as well. And if I always look at the themes, like, you kind of see liberty, fraternity, freedom, brotherhood, sisterhood, all that kind of stuff started to come in with the Libra star point. So I'm very excited about the Libra star point coming in.
Yeah. And so the Libra star points when the Sun and Venus meet up. And so it hasn't happened
it hasn't happened in the sign of Libra.
In the sign of Libra since the 1800s.
The last Libra star point, because the star point moves back through the signs, every 4 years we'll have a Libra star point, one direct with Venus direct, one with with Venus retrograde. And the last one was in 1879. So yeah, we haven't. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal. It feels like ushering in a new era in many ways, right?
It really does, and this one happens to coincide as well with a major age of air in other ways, and Libra's an air sign. We have Pluto moving into Aquarius, which, most people that follow astrology know, and I don't want to get sidetracked to that one. But we also had the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter at 0 Aquarius, which was actually a great mutation. So the great conjunction happens every 20 years, and it moved into air, and it's going to be in air for 200 years. So we're in several ways, we are moving into this age of air, which is usually more about ideas, invention, creativity, humanitarianism, balance. There's all those kind of themes coming up. Justice, another one. So.
Yeah, I think it's definitely really interesting, and I do think it's all tied in, like you pointed out. It's tied in because of the air cycle, because this stuff is happening at the same time in the sky, right? Soon we're going to have Uranus move into Gemini, another air sign, to kind of complete the triplicity there and figure out what this all means. And when you said that the last Venus star point that was close to 29 degrees of Libra was in 1771, well, we think of 1776, and it's like a 5-year period. So it's like, it's not like this stuff has to happen immediately. It's sort of ushering in a new age, and it can take some time to settle in, right?
Yeah, exactly. And for example, we're moving backwards from a Scorpio star point that's been kind of ruling for over 100 years. And we do have one more Scorpio star point, and we're going to have a 0 Scorpio star point in it's now 3.5 years time before we fully settle into the Libra star point. So all these shifts move kind of back and forth for a few years until they really settle into the new era, but we're definitely entering the new era. So
Yeah. And I remember I saw an article, maybe it was probably a few months ago now, um about green hydrogen. There's this Australian mining magnate, and he wants to save the planet with green hydrogen. That was the title from the Washington Post article that I saw. And I remember we chatted a little bit about it just by instant message or whatever, because it was so interesting that the article was published about maybe a month after that Venus star point. And I think one of the things that Ariel Gutman has said about the Scorpio Venus star point is that it brought us the petroleum age, right? It brought us the fuel, the petroleum, because Scorpio is about that stuff, that muck that comes up from the earth. And what is petroleum but the muck that comes from the earth? And
mining was a huge thing. All that kind of, all things, of all energies.
Yeah. And so maybe we're like moving away from that petroleum age and more into, I don't know what kind of energy we could get from quote unquote air, but something more balanced, perhaps. Libra's balanced. It's the scales, something that's maybe a little bit more neutral to the earth in some kind of a way.
And cleaner as well, I think. Nuclear fission as well. There's been some big leaps in both nuclear fusion and fission. I do think we're going to move rapidly, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
Well, when I say rapidly,
Yeah.
24 years into clean energy.
Yeah. And it's interesting if you think about like the rulership too, because Scorpio is ruled by Mars or by Pluto, which are kind of more difficult, more challenging planets to work with. And so Venus is in this uncomfortable place when she's in Scorpio sometimes, where she's got to look over to Mars and be like, hey, can I do what I want to do? And he's like, if you do it my way, baby, kind of. Whereas like when Venus is in Libra, this is her home sign. And so the sun even has to go, hey, Libra, what do you want? Or hey, Venus, what do you want? And Venus goes, this is what I want. And he goes, anything you want. So yeah.
Even more exciting than that, in 2040, we're actually moving from an Aries star point into Pisces, and Venus is exalted in Pisces. So we're moving into a Libran age in so many ways, into a Venus age, from a Mars age, because Mars rules Aries, of course, as well. So, I think there's going to be a lot more kind of slowing down, a lot more talk about loving each other, a lot more talk about supporting each other, whereas both Scorpio and Aries star points have been very driven, very power hungry, very greedy, very manipulative. Obviously had some good points too, but
Yeah. And I think the energies out there right now are supporting this in so many ways. If you think about the nodes in the sky, the nodes are these theoretical points that help us figure out where the eclipses are going to happen, because the sun and the moon and the earth all align, so that a shadow is cast either on the sun or the earth or the moon. And those nodes have been in Taurus and Scorpio, which are ruled by Venus and Mars. And this year, they're going to move into Aries and Libra, which are also ruled by Venus and Mars. So we get this 3-year period of eclipses that are really about this Venus and Mars thing. And even this year, just the way that those two planets are going to travel together, a lot of astrologers have described it as the dance of Venus and Mars, because Venus kind of tries to catch up with Mars. And then once they enter Leo, which we'll talk about, then Venus does her thing and she stations retrograde, and Mars is like, I'm gonna keep going. I've got a mission. I'm gonna keep going. And Venus is like, I got some things to think about. So tell us about this Venus retrograde in Leo.
Okay, so the Venus retrograde in Leo is happening in July and August and September. I think we have the dates. And the Venus star point in Leo is going to be on August the 13th, 2023 at 20 degrees of Leo. And it's going to be square to Uranus. So these are fixed signs. And this is really kind of going to radically shift some things, I think. Now, we had a Venus star point in Leo 8 years ago. So what would that be, 2015, before I started doing my Venus retrograde classes. And that one, I think, was at 22 Leo. So you can see they always move back either 1 or 2 degrees every time we have a retrograde star point. But what makes this one so special is this square to Uranus that is in the Venus ruled sign of Taurus. So, you know, and we've been experiencing this Uranus in Taurus over the last couple of years as we record this with a Saturn-Uranus square. But I think the star point being being square to Uranus is really going to bring some massive radical change. Now, Leo, of course, is the sign of royalty and leadership and so on and so forth. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's some big shifts, big and radical shifts in leadership globally. I think of the royal family because I'm British by birth, but I think it's going to be beyond that, not just the royal family. So,
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's interesting that you bring that up because one of the things that I noticed is that like for the year in general, so a little bit of a tangent, but I'll bring us back, hopefully, or maybe you'll help us bring me back. But we've got this Jupiter Chiron conjunction happening in on March 11th in the sign of Aries, which we get a Jupiter Chiron conjunction roughly every 13 years. I think it is like 13.58 or something like that. And we've never, though, been consciously aware of the Jupiter Chiron conjunction while it's happening in Aries, because Chiron was discovered just about 50 years ago at 3 degrees of Taurus. So it happened, and we can look back at what happened, but we didn't know while it was happening that it was happening. And the other thing that's really interesting is that Chiron is going to get to like 19 degrees and 58 or 57 minutes of Aries. And the United States in the Sibley chart from July 4th, 1776 has Chiron at 20 degrees. So we're just like barely approaching this Chiron return for the United States. At the same time, we have this first conscious awareness of it. But the reason I bring it up is because 3 hours before that conjunction goes exact, Venus is going to be conjunct with Eris.
Aha.
In Aries.
At 24 Aries.
And so what I looked back at was the last time then that Jupiter was conjunct Eris was April 29th of 2011. And when I Googled like what happened that day, William and Kate got married.
Ooh.
Right? So you're saying, okay, the royal family, I see something about royalty. It's in the sign of Leo. It has to do with Venus. And I think that this story is going to carry through. So something about Jupiter Chiron, something about Venus Eris, something about Jupiter Eris is really perhaps going to tie in, especially because they're both fire signs, right?
So well, also, if you think about it, you said the conjunction of Jupiter and Chiron will be 19 degrees. I hadn't actually even looked at that ish. Yeah. That's trying to the Venus star point in Leo. And of course, you know, 24 degrees of Aries is pretty much trying to the star point too. So an Eris, I call her the shit stirrer. I think there's going to be some.
She sure is, yeah.
I think there's going to be major, well, and Uranus as well is a sign of, you know, radical shifts. Kind of, I always think of Uranus as hitting you around the head with a 2x4. It's like slap.
Yeah.
Wait, see this, and I think, you know, there's a lot of people going to get a few shocks this year, shall we?
And the other thing is like, okay, so 2011, it's now 2023. So if I do the math, it's 12 years. 12 years is a Jupiter cycle. And we also know it's a Jupiter return. Jupiter returns to the same point in the sky every 12 years because it's in the same sign. It's in Aries again, because Eris moves very, very slowly. So everyone who's alive today, as far as I know, has Eris and Aries, unless they're like well over 100, I think.
I think they've all died out now.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's got Eris in Pisces. So Jupiter must have met up in Aries with Eris because of that. So this is the Jupiter return of their marriage, and it has been in the spotlight recently because of the Netflix special with Prince William and Meg. Is she
Harry?
still a Duchess? Harry, sorry. Harry.
Yes, the Duke and Duchess of
Okay.
Sussex.
So the Duke and Duchess. Okay, thank you. I did watch it, but like I'm not so good with all the details sometimes. I'm like, okay, so what's their current title? Like I'm not as aware.
I could easily get it wrong too. I've been away from the UK for a long time, but no, they are the Sussexes, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. So,
Yeah. So
yeah.
we'll see what happens there, right? And I mean, okay, so it's Venus, and Venus is a happy planet,
Oh yeah.
right?
Generally, I think every planet has its, it's the lesser benefic in traditional astrology, but Venus can cause problems as well, but it's generally one of the happier planets. Yeah.
So I wonder if the story might go like, okay, so in March and in April, we've got these conjunctions, Jupiter, Venus, Eris, Chiron, and that's not comfortable. It's like there's something that hurts here, Chiron, Eris throwing that golden apple in to start the Trojan War, saying who's the fairest, and all the goddesses have to fight over it, which is kind of the story that we saw in the documentary, right? It was sort of like, who's the fairest? Is it Kate or is it Meghan? Now, or the stepsister too, like, which is like, where did the stepsister come from? Like but it happened, unfortunately. And so there's some injury, there's some pain, there's some hurt, there's a wound that needs to be addressed, and it's almost like there's no good way to address it. And then Eris just comes in and someone starts some shit. But then when Venus meets up with the sun at 20 degrees of Leo, do we feel like what does that moment look like? Is it more of like a healing moment or a turning point?
It's a turning point. However, after the Venus star point, Venus then becomes morning star, which is the more warrior-like Venus, shall we say, more action-oriented star. The last Venus star point was in Capricorn in January of 2022. I'm getting, yes, years, because we've just turned the year. I'm like, what year was it? And we had the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and that was in Capricorn, the sign of authoritarianism and various other things, just to show that a Venus retrograde star point can be more kind of I'm going to say warlike, but not necessarily war, but it's more assertive, more aggressive. So I think the Venus star point in Leo launches a 9.5-month birthing of something to the next, before the next star point, which is the superior star point when Venus is direct. And the 9.5-month period is always like a pregnancy. Something is birthed from that point. So I don't think, we can't necessarily expect something to happen on the star point. It's what comes of it over the 9.5 months afterwards, what's birthed on that star point. So
Yeah, so that's really interesting, and especially what you said about Ukraine, because one of the things I've been looking at, like, not to bring us away from the star point again, but just like this Venus and Eris thing. So when Venus is making hard aspects to Eris, what happens? And Ukraine is certainly part of that story too. And I think some of the other things that have happened, and so some of those dates were December 28th of 2022, we had a Venus square Eris. And I think what happened was Andrew Tate was identified by the authorities in his country by Greta Thunberg. So a woman and a man and something kind of difficult. And he wanted to start some shit, which is what Eris does, right? And she was like, "Oh, you want to start some shit?" Like and then they found him and then arrested him on these human trafficking charges. And then August 7th was another, February 26th was another, and I think October 18th. And when I looked back, I saw Biden picked Ketanji Brown as Supreme Court justice on one of these days. And then there were citizens in Ukraine at the border seeking to become refugees, and other people were taking up arms in Russia. There were like protesters scuffling in France. And we also did have the Inflation Reduction Act passed on one of these days. And so if truly this story of the star point is going to be tied into whatever's happening earlier in the spring, those are some of the things that we might look out for, because they do have to do with leaders, right? Leo, so Biden, Ketanji Brown, woman, and then Venus is also about money too, right? So the Inflation Reduction Act, the big money thing, that kind of, it was like, what are we going to do here? Like, is it the right thing? And I think it was a little contentious at the time. It was like, oh, this is a lot of money, we're spending it. And there's some criticism there, but I think, I don't know.
And with the Venus star points square to Uranus, a lot of people are predicting some major economic issues this year. And I think we're seeing signs of that for sure. But, Uranus is in a Venus ruled sign that's associated with money and square to the Venus star point. And Uranus brings radical shifts, I think. I think there's going to be some, even in the worst depression, a lot of people made a lot of money as well. So there's going to be a lot of ups and downs with that, with finances and just general feelings of wealth and abundance. And, Leo's a lovely sign. It likes to just have joy and it likes to have fun and it likes to shine and things. I think the bubble might be a little bit popped here and there with the Venus star point, to be honest. So
yeah. So Uranus and Taurus, and it just makes me think there's so many echoes of this year, right? You're talking about the financial shifts. Uranus and Taurus is certainly shakeups to our money because it's a Venus rule sign. Venus is in charge. I think I've seen a lot about like just Taurus being the earth as well. And like, how are we changing the things that come from the earth? And one of the reasons that it's money is because like gold and silver, they come from the earth. They are of the earth, right? But then like our food and our food system, supply chain disruptions and things like that. And so I wonder if on the very high vibe positive side, an opportunity could be looking at the food system, looking at the supply chain, and actually trying to clean up some of what we do so we have cleaner food. I mean, I just saw yet another post. I follow this stuff, so the algorithms know how to get me. But yet another post by like a social media influencer the other day who was like, I've been with my family in Europe for, I think it was France, for like so many days or weeks, and I've eaten horribly according to American standards. I've eaten like cheese every day and like wine and beer and all this dairy, pasta, bread. And he goes, and I have lost 3 pounds and I feel healthier than I ever have. And it really is because it's like, what are we doing with our food? How are we processing it? What are the inputs that go into it that are microscopic that we can't like see or really taste, but our body is feeling it and not filtering it properly? Or is it like in the air, right? Venus star point in Libra. Is it something in the air that's like, that we're not aware of that is contaminating? And then on the other end of the spectrum, I saw someone who was like, don't listen to people who say that there's poison in your food because then you'll believe it. And it's like, but if it's in your food, it's in your food. I don't really know. Like, you're just supposed to ignore it. Like,
positive, think it away.
Yeah. So that was a bit of a tangent, but I think that the other thing is just
it really resonates with me because, like I said, I think there'll be a lot of winners and losers, and I think the climate could be a winner. I think I've already, you and I are both quite ecological minded, and I'm beginning to see a lot of articles written by saying that climate change is not happening as rapidly as they thought it would. it's starting to slow down. And, you know, with the moving into air and the possibility of clean energy and so on and so forth, and looking at the food supply, I think, you know, that the pandemic brought that to a head as well. I think there's going to be a lot of wins in that respect. We're going to start, I've talked about it for a long time, that people are moving back to organic community gardens, permaculture you're interested in as well. All those kind of things are just going to rapidly increase because they kind of have to. So we've got, you know, if we're to survive, which is very Taurus as well.
Yeah.
Taurus. Oh, we're talking about the sudden changes though. Elon Musk has just become the person to lose most wealth in the fastest time ever. So we're
Really?
talking about changes, yes.
Oh, wow. I didn't hear that. So is that like in the news today?
I think it was just over the last couple of days. It wasn't in major news, but I saw it pop up in a couple of places because of, you know, his Twitter purchase and all the craziness going on there. His wealth has just taken a nosedive. So, yeah, there's going to be
And
winners.
that's very Uranus, right? It's like that sudden, I think Rick Levine says it's the instantaneous resolution of irresolvable opposites is Uranus. And it's just that lightning strike that changes your fate, that changes the circumstances instantly out of the blue. You couldn't expect it or predict it.
Yeah, definitely. And so even though we won't have the Leo star point until the summer, until August, I think when the point is activated by other energies, like you said, the Jupiter Chiron conjunction, and I'm going to say the Venus Eris conjunction as well, I think things will start to happen because it is Venus. Incidentally, we've also got, haven't we got a new moon in Aries that's going to be at 29 Aries, exactly opposing that star point. That's the one we're currently under.
That's a good point. And it's a black moon and it is a solar eclipse, a hybrid solar eclipse.
Oh, yeah, which are very powerful
Yeah.
hybrid, aren't they, though? I was listening to the astrology podcast. I didn't really know what a hybrid was, but Austin Coppock was saying he'd looked it up, and it kind of is partially total eclipse and partially an annular eclipse. So either way, it's a really powerful eclipse.
Yeah.
Hybrid kind of makes it sound like it's not very special, but no, it's big.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think they're not so common.
No,
So,
they're not. Yeah.
and I know the nodes will be in Scorpio and Taurus, but the sun and moon will be in Aries. And it's that second new moon in Aries. So when I said black moon, that's what I meant by it. Not black moon Lilith, although that's kind of an interesting thing to think about, but maybe for another time. But I guess I'll bring that up now because I do think one of the themes of this coming year is about speaking truth to power.
Mm-hmm.
And so Leo is that sign of the king. We've got,
and we're currently under the Libra star point, and air signs are very much about speaking, voice. Even though Gemini is more associated with voice, but Libra is too, and it's justice. It's the scales of justice, and you need truth to come out for that too. So yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a really good point. Like just the information and am I sharing it? And then when Venus gets into Leo, it's sort of like, I mean, at least when Mercury's in Leo, it's like, hey, I got to get my voice out there. I'm the star of the show. And Venus in Leo is also very showy and it's not really reserved at all. And it does just want to get out there and have fun. And it can be kind of like, I don't want to say boastful, but maybe a little, right? Like a little like showy little peacock feathers kind of a thing. Have a good time.
Dramatic, yeah.
A little dramatic. Yeah. I think that's a good way to say it. But just going back to what you were saying before about wealth and things like that, I think that one of the echoes of this Venus star point, if that is part of it, is that Pluto is going to square the nodes for the first time since I think it was 2016 or 2015-ish. And when that happened, the last time, the Swiss franc was like the value of it was capped, and it caused panic in the markets. The the Greek debt crisis was happening at that point in time. We had major shifts in leadership, like you're saying. So Venus star point in Leo being leadership. Ban Ki-moon replaced Kofi Annan as the head of the United Nations at that point in time. And so and when you look back even farther to like the Venus retrograde in Leo cycle, we do see leadership being a big part of it. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, which I don't think I've heard anyone talk about, not to say that they aren't, and not to say, like, I'm curious what you think about this, but I noticed that this is the first Venus retrograde that's happening fully in the sign of Leo since General Custer's last stand in the 1800s. So
I hadn't found that out yet, but wow, yeah.
because before, if it was retrograde, it would start in Virgo and
Yeah.
then come back to Leo and then go back. Now this one's starting at 28 degrees of Leo and it'll go back to 12 degrees 11 minutes. So the whole thing is contained within, and even the star point, it's contained at 20 degrees 28 minutes of Leo. And I don't know, I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, I always think there is something to that. One thing before I dive into the Leo thing is that the Pluto cycle and the Venus star point cycle almost track each other exactly, by the way. The Venus star point cycle is fully 251 years and Pluto cycle is 248.
Ooh.
So it's entirely relevant that Pluto is squaring the Venus and Mars ruled nodes in July during isn't it just before the retrograde? I did have the dates in my head, but I don't. But
Yeah, it's like the 20 something.
it's also at
28th.
It does it 3 times, like within 5 days. It's because of retrogrades, but it's all at anaretic degree as well, the 29th degree. So the summer with a Venus star point square to Uranus and Pluto square the nodes at the anaretic, which is the last degree of the signs, it is a very critical point of change. And anything squaring the nodes is also a critical point of change because that's moving us then towards the north node after well, this one will be anyway, yeah.
And so this Venus Pluto story is interesting for a couple reasons. So I was just looking for the date. So Venus enters Leo on June 5th, and immediately as it enters Leo, it opposes Pluto.
Yeah.
And when we talk about the Venus retrograde story, the archetypes of it, often what comes up is this Pluto story of Inanna. And sorry, I'm getting all these pings. Turn that off. Excuse me. So we get this story of Inanna going into the underworld, or Persephone going into the underworld and being stolen by Pluto, and this sort of very traumatic story of a young woman being taken and bad things happening and then emerging. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, oh gosh, so many thoughts. You mentioned at the start that Neptune is the higher octave of Venus, and I think there's something to that, and that's what astrologers generally say. However, I also think, and I have to thank my friend Kevin Mulinger for this, he and I had a big conversation. He said, Venus and Pluto have a lot in common. They're both about desire. Venus is about manifestation and desire, earthly heart desire, and Pluto is really kind of soul's desire. I don't think Pluto is the soul, but it's kind of what we desire deep down inside, whatever the soul is. And this Venus-Pluto dance is really important to my mind. On December the 7th, 2024, Pluto and Venus and Ceres, who is the mother of Inanna or Persephone, all meet at 0 Aquarius, which is, yeah.
Wow. That 0 Aquarius, I mean, it's getting its money's worth.
Oh, isn't it? We had a Mars-Venus conjunction there as well in 2022 after the last Venus retrograde.
Yeah, and I think it was January 19th or it was January 21st of 2019. The nodes were there, or we had an eclipse there.
Yeah.
Then December 21st of 2020, the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction happened there. We've got Pluto making 5 hits to 0 Aquarius because it will retrograde, not once, but it'll retrograde twice over it. And what else there's something else I'm missing about that 0 Aquarius. I know Jupiter will square Pluto at 0 Taurus and 0 Aquarius. Yeah, it's huge.
The last Scorpio star point as well will be square to that 0 Aquarius.
Yes, it will.
So
Interesting.
if anybody doubts that we are finally moving into the age of Aquarius, I think all these hits to 0 Aquarius are bringing it in.
And you know, what I find so interesting, I want to pull it up again. I was looking at the Sabian symbol, and I know it's an Adobe house, excuse me, something like that. And
then I'll talk about the retrograde in Leo.
Yeah. So the Sabian symbol for 0 Aquarius is a safe and comfortable place to live, work, pray, and practice our spiritual lives, because the old Adobe missions were built with a great deal of effort, sacrifice, commitment, and a sense of community, with one eye on the path and the other on the very real everyday needs of the people that it serves. And so it's not just about, so Aquarius can be about this whole like, what are we building for the people that we serve? But there's also this energy in this Adobe mission about, it says, we sometimes assume that our beliefs are right and that others need to be shown the truth. But really what that is asking us to do is say, like, can I just lean into curiosity, and can I not just be like, oh, I'm right and I know the truth and I'm just going to like tell and force my opinions on other people? I want to ask some questions. Right. And so what are we creating so that we can have more inclusive, heart-based, perhaps Leo, courageous communities that actually create new worlds and are based somehow in spirituality as well.
And also, Aquarius is such an interesting sign. Bringing it back to the 2 rulers, the traditional ruler being Saturn and the modern ruler being Uranus. Aquarius is this weird mix of tradition, all the good from what was the past, and innovative for the future. And I think, my example of, going to permaculture is bringing in the best of the past, but we've got to bring it in a very new way. And going back to some of the old shamanic practices for fire management and so on, or the indigenous practices for fire management. We need to learn from the past to bring it into the new, to serve all of us in a heart-led way, as you say. So, I'm very hopeful, kind of thing. We've clearly been in the turmoil point of a turning of the ages, just like when the Libra star point came at 1771, and we're entering the Libra star point now. It took time for these revolutions to kind of settle in and for the new inventions to come in. But it was really an age of tremendous growth. I mean, it left out a lot of people, of course. It left out women and people of color to a great degree, but but we hopefully have learned from that, and we can do that differently this time. So yeah, anyway.
But you were saying about the Leo retrograde.
Oh yeah. Well, one thing I noticed is that this Mars retrograde that we're currently in was fully in the sign of Gemini as well, for the first time since, I think, 1943. I did a podcast with Mandy Ray of Ecstatic Astrology about that. So when did you say the last Leo one was?
The last Venus in fully in the sign. Give me one second. It was June 25th to 28th of 1876.
See, that was 3 years before the last Libra star point. So I do think there is something different when a planet is retrograde fully in a sign. And again, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. I think there's going to be kind of something coming back from that time that we are kind of reviewing I would be interested to look what was happening with people with like the royal family and things in 1876.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
one of the things I think about like the leadership thing. So you just brought up like people of color, people who are maybe historically marginalized, oppressed, or violence is committed against them. General Custer's last stand was about the Indian Appropriations Act and how he went to essentially like slaughter indigenous people in the in the Americas in their homelands, and then he botched it, and like everyone died, and there was this story that was created by his widow to make him a hero. And that's very Leo. Like he
Yeah.
fucked up. He
Yeah.
did.
Did.
And she was like, and it was embarrassing and it was horrifying. I mean, embarrassing to the Americans, right? Horrifying that this like genocide is being committed, period. But then that they turned it into not just he was a hero, Leo, but that there was like one survivor. There was a story that there was one survivor. And so like 44 or something people came up saying, I'm the last survivor of General Custer's last stand. And that's a very, like I was saying, that like that almost boastful quality of Leo that can come out to be the hero, to be the one, to have the spotlight. And so I think that also these eclipses in Aries and Libra are going to start this story. And with Chiron, it's starting the story that you kind of touched on before. You brought up Elon Musk, and it's like, who is this cult of personality? Chiron can be someone who's extremely charismatic. Not David Cochran did a great lecture on that at Kepler University several years ago. So that Chiron is not just the wound, Chiron is charisma. Because of that Saturn Uranus orbit. So I know we're jumping all over the place, but it really is all connected. It's like Venus is connected to Pluto, and then Chiron's connected to Saturn and Uranus, and then we've got these eclipses in the nodes and stuff. But anyway, it's this cult of personality. Are we following Elon? Are we following Trump? Are we following Andrew Tate? Are we following Greta Thunberg? Are we following Lizzo? Who is the person that we're following, and who are the people who follow them, and whose battles are we fighting? Back to that General Custer's last stand. What are the battles that we're fighting worthy, and what lights our heart up, Leo? What makes us, where do we have to be courageous? Where do we have to be compassionate? Where can we actually put the spotlight on other people and help them? Like Lizzo, I don't know if you saw this, I reposted it, but she won some award for like courage or bravery or something, and she wasn't going to go accept the award. And then she brought like 20 or so activists on, female women identified activists on stage with her that all had their own individual thing. So they're individuals, but then it was like this group. And so right, to rise up, which is sort of like that Aquarius Leo axis, and Jupiter is going to be square when this happens. So it's off a little bit when they all like square, when Jupiter squares Pluto, and then when Venus squares Jupiter, and when Venus opposes Pluto. But just having it within orb when they all happen it's like really making this big and blowing it up and saying this Venus in Leo is something to pay attention to this year.
I think it's really something to pay attention to. I find every Venus retrograde powerful, and the class that I do has just really, I don't take credit. I just kind of did what Venus told me. But I do follow Inanna's journey into the underworld in the class, and we do a lot of shamanic healing work in it. But I think, even if you don't come and do my class, but whoever's listening, please, come follow me and join my class in the summer. It's kind of amazing. But I think it's important collectively, important personally. I think Leo, another thing that is really about turning the focus onto self-love as well, and to the heart. So that's a really important part. I don't think this year is going to be quite as discordant as the last several years. I think we're kind of coming out of it, but we've got a lot of energy changes. And when it comes down to it, really, self-love and caring for you and yours is really the most important start, and then it ripples out. So that's a big part of the retrograde in Leo, to my mind, as well.
Yeah, self-love. And so I love that message. So if people want to work with it personally, you said you do, you have the class, and one of the things that you encourage is shamanic journeying. Are there other ways that you see like themes that come up for people on a personal level when Venus goes retrograde that folks might want to be aware of?
I think of it in shamanic terms, but soul retrieval, I do often parts of the self, kind of, you know, the wounded parts that you'd kind of shut away, they kind of return on a Venus retrograde. And in a Leo, I think this will be heart wounds, you know, where somebody's deeply hurt you and you've not actually dealt with that wound. And the fact Chiron is trining just before the star point as well is going to help that one along. So, you know, anything that you can do to help yourself. I don't know if we're ever fully healed. I find the word heal a bit of an odd one, but you can kind of rise above and heal the worst of it and move on from things. I think that's going to be a big thing with the Venus retrograde in Leo, people coming back, parts of yourself that are coming back, because Venus is other people as well, and perhaps healing your money story as well. And where you're too frivolous, Leo can be a very frivolous sign.
Yeah.
So, likes to take risks and just probably splash all its money every month, you know.
um you know, so I always like to just sprinkle in a little bit of permaculture principles. And so I think, you know, one of the things that we do in astrology always, and I think we've demonstrated that in our conversation so far, is the first principle, which is observing and interacting. So knowing when the patterns are happening, saying, hey, I can look back, you know, 4 years or 8 years and look back 9.5 months or so to the last cycle, but this is in a different sign. So how does that all work? And when we observe and interact and we take the time to engage with these planets and with these energies and these cycles, then we can start to design and start to, you know, if you can recognize a pattern, like you said, you might not heal, but at least you can start to do this other principle, which is like integrate rather than segregate, right? Integration is perhaps like maybe one of the better goals rather than like heal, right?
Yeah.
Like we just want to like integrate our experiences. And also, it sounds like what you do in your class is another principle, which is applying self-regulation and accepting feedback.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, we take it through in the class. We actually follow Inanna's journey. I have my where's my book? It's always to hand and I can't see it right now, but anyway, it's there somewhere. She goes through all these gates, 7 gates, which actually relate to the chakras. And Venus does that when she disappears behind the sun as well for the superior conjunction, which we've just had. But I find the 7-week period of the retrograde is a great time to actually do this work. And it's really kind of going, you know, to get into the woo terms, it's using the work to balance your chakras, to bring yourself into wholeness and integration. If we look at the story of Inanna herself, she was Queen of the East and you know, quite adorned queen going to Leo, the royalty, and she stripped herself, or she was stripped of all her adornments as she went down into the underworld to visit what I see as her shadow self, which was her sister Erishkigal, and she actually experienced kind of a death of the self and then was reborn. And in Leo, this one's really going to be to talk in kind of very woo language. It's going to say, what does it mean to be queen of your own life or king of your own life, if you which however you identify. And what does that mean? You know, can you become kind of the benevolent kind of leader and ruler and lead your own life first, put yourself first, and then lead others as well, lead by example, instead of kind of putting the thumb on things. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. How can and what I'm hearing in what you're saying is a lot of creativity too, which is something that we didn't quite touch on yet. And I think it's interesting because Venus has her what we call joy, like she flourishes when she's in the 5th house. And Leo, if you want to do the quote unquote ABCs of astrology, Leo's the natural ruler of the 5th house. And so when you have this combination of Venus and Leo, when you think about the 5th house, what we see in the 5th house is creativity.
Oh yeah.
And so it's like, so last permaculture principle I'll say is this last principle, which is the 12th one, creatively using and responding to change. And I think that could be an opportunity that we have with this cycle. And so I definitely encourage folks to take your class and work with you on that if you're interested, especially because of everything that's going on, all of the planets. I mean, this is just another echo of that. And I think that Venus being a personal planet that is close to us, that we can understand, it's a great opportunity to integrate all of these energies.
And to Venus herself is a creative energy as well. As I mentioned, she is manifestation, and we're creating all the time. So, you know, when Taylor says creativity, I always have to say, don't think that doesn't mean you have to become an artist. You're creating your life. You're kind of like painting the brushstrokes of your life and what brings you a joyful life and so on. And that's going to be a big part of the retrograde, I think, too. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And it's funny because so I took the Artist's Way class, which I absolutely loved and adored. It was so wonderful. So it's great that you bring that up again, because you really understand this, like the Artist's Way and how we are actively creating and the ways that we have to release things in order to allow for the new to come in. I think that'll be a part of this Venus retrograde cycle and just the year in general, with so much of what's going on in 2023, right?
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, this year is, you know, by the end of 2023 and 2024, the world is just going to look so different, I think. And I think good things are coming, but I think change can be hard. So if you focus on your heart and balance in your own life to do the Libra star point we're under now, then everything kind of falls into place. The chaos going on out there affects you less if you are balanced in your own life. So.
Yeah, definitely. So is there anything, I've got like one and a half more questions for you, but is there anything else about this Venus star point or Venus retrograde cycle we haven't touched on that you'd like to share about?
I just think just thinking elementally, we're in an air star point now, and then we're moving into a fire one. I like to think of how the elements work together. So fire and air work together to create like a wildfire effect. I think this kind of year is going to be a bit of a wildfire of change, and it kind of might blow our socks off a little bit. But again, I think it can be good things coming. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Like air is that information, and then fire is like this intuitive sort of like inspiration and sort of like taking action in some ways, can be impulsive. And what do you do when you add oxygen air to a fire? It's like you said. So I love that. I love that, because before, I guess it would have been Scorpio water and Virgo earth.
Yes.
So we went from like more of like a fertile to more of like this cataclysmic, like
well, if you notice, we've had a lot of kind of earth. I think wildfires, incidentally, will increase. So there's a negative side of it. But if you think about, we've had a lot of biggest hurricanes ever, and you know, big mudslides. There's been loads of mudslides with all this earth and water energy, and I think fire is going to be a whole different vibe. But again, always good things, always not so good things too.
Yeah. So the name of this podcast is On Thriving, Astrology and More. And we've talked a bit about the more. We've talked about your, you know, some of the things that you do in your class, which is shamanic journeying. So it's like not quite astrology, but using the astrology to do other things. You have offered an Artist's Way course as well to support folks with, you know, just their lives and their journeys and creative lives. But the question that I want to ask is, how do you see astrology in general helping people to thrive? One, and then the other half of the question, so that's why I said I have one and a half questions for you, is how can astrology make the world a better place, or should it?
Oof. Well, I always say astrology is my 42, for those who know Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
Okay.
Because all of life is cycles. and astrology is all about cycles and movement and always shifting change, but everything is cyclical. And I do think that when we're tuned into the cycles and understanding the flow of the energies, that it can really help us and help to create a better world. It's not that we can control the planets. I even have a t-shirt saying I control the stars for no one, because one of my favorite questions on my daily astrology posts is, when will it end? I'm like, it doesn't end. Things fade out, things come in, and different.
We integrate.
Yeah, we integrate. But I think when you're tuned in, and that's why I work shamanically with the planets as well, is I think you just flow with life better, and you're not controlling it, but you're controlling your response and reaction to what's going on in the world. Probably that's how I put it.
Yeah. So when we find greater peace because of awareness, because of acknowledgement, because of practicing non-attachment to a certain extent, relinquishing control, then we can find greater peace. And when we're at greater peace, we can invite happiness. And when we can invite happiness and peace, the whole world can benefit.
I've got an example, if you don't mind me.
I would love that.
A little bit of politics into it.
Okay.
When Donald Trump was elected in 2016, I was probably the calmest person on the planet, because I just saw him as a player in the big cycles, that he was going to reveal a lot of stuff that needs to be changed or shored up or balanced. And that's been turned out to be true, because I know there's moves now to shore up holes in kind of the rules and regulations of the US government, to make sure that certain things can't ever happen again, and so on and so forth. And whilst he's not my favorite person on the planet, I also didn't think it was the end of the world, because the astrology helped me to see further ahead than that. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Not getting caught up in like hysterics and hysterical like media stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I can see the archetypes here, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he's a very tangible example of it. So and I hope you don't get comments from that.
You know what? It's all good. Our people find us, and the people not meant for us, they can peacefully go where they want to go.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's all good. So Louise, thank you so much for being here and sharing with us. It was such a beautiful offering that you've shared with all of us. Where can people find you and connect with you?
Well, my business name is Cosmic Owl Astrology. I'm on Facebook page Cosmic Owl Astrology, Instagram, my least favorite probably. My favorite site is actually YouTube. I'm really growing my YouTube channel and doing a lot of video now. I also have a podcast called Weirdly Cosmic Podcast, which I'm going to ask Taylor to come on my podcast too. So yeah, if you Google Cosmic Owl Astrology or Bing it or whatever search engine you use, it should come up. So
wonderful. And so, oh, I love that. It's so pretty. So your class is going to happen like at the same time as this Venus retrograde cycle?
Yeah, the first call I think I've scheduled for July the 21st. So, I'll be talking about that in the months leading up to it, and then there'll be a link to sign up in the weeks before. So.
And do you have a community as well that people can get involved with earlier than that?
Yeah, I have a Venus Enchantment community is my membership. It's $23 a month, and I do monthly calls and lots of little daily videos to keep people in tune. And also they get 2 monthly calls. One looks at the Moon Venus conjunction every month. That's the Venus gates, as she's either ascending or descending. And on that call I kind of will answer questions about members' charts. And then the other call is kind of Cosmic Owl Astrology School. We're kind of building up a library of teaching knowledge so people can learn more about astrology.
Awesome. Definitely get connected, Cosmic Owl Astrology, and get connected with Louise. fabulous astrologer, one of my favorites. And I'll just plug my own stuff right now that I've got my 2023 year ahead horoscopes. I'm also accepting clients for consultations. I think you do as well. Is that right, Louise? Your book's open right now?
They are, but I'm quite booked out because
Okay.
I've had to reduce the number I'm doing a week because I'm doing that horary class, and
Yes.
my focus is on the membership, building that, and my YouTube this year. So if you
Awesome.
want a consultation, go to Taylor.
I'll take you. Love to talk with you. And yeah, get your year ahead horoscope. I've got a general year ahead horoscope where I do talk more about like general Custer's last stand and Pluto square the nodes and all of the things that are happening and so much more for this next year. And then there are individual sign based horoscopes. So get yours at taylorshuler.com/shop, or you can book a consultation with me at taylorshuler.com/offering. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Louise, again. And we'll see you again next time.
Thank you for having me, Taylor. It's been awesome.
Awesome. Take good care.
Thank you.